Allison, the red light's on, so it is pressure time. Hopefully you're comfortable with the red light there for recording.
That's fine.
All right, awesome. Well, let's start with a quick sound check. What'd you have for breakfast this morning?
A green smoothie and I don't know, something else. Sausage.
Okay, all right. You do a lot of smoothies? Big smoothie fan?
It's my daily requirement for my kids. That's why they hate me.
Okay, all right.
Currently, no.
All right, very cool. Like now, do you have all kinds of different flavors and stuff for the smoothies, or is
It's pretty much the same every day. It's just getting everything they need in there.
All right, cool. Getting all the bananas and the strawberries, making sure that they get it all right.
Yeah, the kale is the part they're not crazy about, but or the spinach, but yeah, I think they taste good, but you know,
I'm sure they do. I mean, smoothies are good, so
kids have to complain about something. So
yeah, awesome. All right, well, let's talk a little bit about what you raised money over on Kickstarter for. I mean, you have a campaign that's finished, which is a little bit different on this episode. But what did you raise money for on the platform?
We did a project called "Where Are the Books That Look Like Me?" And this is a project. I'm a writer. And I was also a teacher, though, and I taught in Jackson, Mississippi, and all of my children, well, 95% of them were African American. And so there's a really important thing that happens with readers. They move from being read to being independent readers. And the way they do that is through these little chapter books. And you have kids, so you probably know Junie B. Jones, Magic Tree House, Captain Underpants, Diary of a Wimpy Kid. And they read these and become fluent. So their vocabulary increases, their fluency, which is their ability to read smoothly and clearly, increases, and they become independent readers. Well, there were no books that looked like my students in that genre. And so I didn't presume I could write that book, but I had a good friend from college who is funnier than I am and really smart, and she's an African-American woman who had 2 boys. And I said, would you be interested in writing this with your voice? I'll do the story, you do the voice and the characters. And she said yes. And so we created this series called the Big Monty series. And book 1 is Big Monty and the Lunatic Lunch Lady. And then we wrote the next 3. And we are just going after little boys that need to have a character that they can relate to, that looks like them, that will increase their fluency, their vocabulary, and their literacy.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I believe that's every night we have a new book that comes home. I have a kindergartner and a second grader, so we are.
You're right in that phrase.
Yeah, we're right in it. But and our biggest battle is actually just making them actually do it, because I don't know why they fight it. It's just, you got to do this, man. You got to read. That's cool. So, so it sounds like you have this awesome story as to how this idea started, but what starts to be like the first steps out of the gate? I mean, obviously you kind of started to put the plan together, but then what starts to happen in terms of putting the project really from an idea to on paper?
We co-wrote it in a weekend at a writer's retreat. And so that was not a problem. That was probably the most fun book I've ever written in my life. And we laughed and trying to think like a little first grade or second grade boy is pretty fun. And especially since we both had boys. So that was easy writing it. And it was good. And I knew it was good. So I started sending it out to publishers, traditional publishers, and they kept saying the same thing. There's no market for this. There's no market for this. And I thought, well, maybe there's no market because there are no books like this.
Right.
So we have a chicken and egg problem. And the other thing that was troublesome was that they wanted us to change some things. They liked the voice of the character, Merlin. His name's Merlin, and he hates his name, and he wants everyone to call him by his nickname, Big Monty, but it won't catch on. And they loved him, but they wanted us to make this a serious book. And what we did when we asked boys, African-American boys, what's your favorite book? They would say Star Wars or Diary of a Wimpy Kid. We would say, who's your favorite character? And they would draw a blank. They didn't, character that looks like you.
Right.
And they didn't have an answer for that. And we didn't want a serious book. There are plenty, some of them would say, oh, I like books about Martin Luther King Jr. Or that's not a chapter book that you're going to read and reread.
Right.
And so we wanted, humor, and we weren't willing to make some of the concessions that the traditional publishers wanted us to make, because we knew with boys, that's not what they were looking for.
Yeah, that's crazy. So now is there artwork in this at all?
Yes.
I haven't seen, so like, what is that process starts to happen when you start putting this all together?
Well, that was where it got expensive. So I've traditionally published books with publishers. I've done a couple of independent books, but I'm not an artist, and neither is my co-author, Lenora Wynn. She is brilliant, but we're not artistic. So we had to find a person that we felt comfortable with to bring the story to life. And so we found Chris Miller, who is an independent cartoonist, to do that. But that's when we realized, you can publish a book independently pretty effectively now, but not with illustrations. And then the other thing was, we didn't just want to get it out there published, we wanted to get it into schools. And so that's where we decided, you know what, we're going to need to raise some significant money to do that.
And what about that? I've worked on a couple projects that, trying to get into schools was just borderline nightmare. How do you start working those angles and getting this something to where it's approved by teachers, or what's the process of thinking about this being in schools at some point?
We just went school by school, teacher by teacher, and parents, really. Parents, a lot of the people who sponsored the Kickstarter campaign were parents, and they said, I want this in my school. I want this in my kid's class. So they would sponsor a classroom or a book. We didn't really have any problem with approval. I mean, I think people are just so hungry. They know this is a huge hole in the literature. And gosh, if you can solve it, no questions asked.
Sure. So where in the sort of the arc of this does thinking about Kickstarter come in? Obviously, you mentioned that you knew that you needed to raise funds, but where was the idea of like, okay, we'll go to this platform instead of just literally asking parents or whatever it might have been, or whatever it might be? Like, what was the steps to like, all right, we'll go ahead and do this on Kickstarter?
Well, I run a nonprofit organization as part of my career. And so I had done fundraising through the nonprofit. And our goal with Kickstarter was twofold. One, we thought it might reach people that we didn't already know, that weren't just in our circle of influence already. And two, we wanted to use it as a campaign for awareness of the issue. Most people don't realize, like, if you can find books for your kid, it's not, you don't realize. It's not your problem. And so it's not on your radar. And so we wanted to show the issue. And I thought we had a broader platform with Kickstarter. As far as fundraising, we hoped that we could reach an audience that wasn't already ours. I could have done it through our nonprofit. And we debated back and forth about which way to go with that. And there are pros and cons with both. But our bigger picture was trying to get awareness of the issue out there.
Right. And what outside of, I mean, it seems like this could be a gigantic issue that could be talked about all the time. What were some of the steps to sort of get that message out there before you launched the campaign?
Well, before we launched, we started doing a couple of just emails to people that we knew. And we did a couple little things on Facebook, and we did an interview with each other that we shared, and just asking people, what are the chapter books that your kids are reading? Go to your bookstore and look and see if you can find one that looks like, 50% of the kids in Mississippi. So, asking that question, and then people would say, oh my gosh, I never realized. No, there are none now there are some picture books and there are some, young adult books, but that chapter book where they become independent readers, that is a pretty big blank.
Oh, interesting. And is this something that, as you were going, like, what were you sort of looking at in terms of numbers wise to produce a book like this, and quantities, and what were some of the internal conversations you're having, maybe for somebody else thinking about launching a book product? Like, what were you looking at? Like, all right, we don't want to have the goal too high. We don't want to have the goal too low. What were some of those conversations like?
I wanted to be able to, I had the number 1,000 books in Mississippi schools and so I had to backtrack from that. And then I also thought, I don't want it to be too high. I don't want 2,000 books right now. I want 1,000 to get the message started. And hopefully each book will pay for the next. We've written 3, we could write 10. Right. But I also didn't want it too low. I thought if people can't see the importance of this and they can't make it happen, then it's not time to happen. I've done a lot of where I pulled my own weight on projects and made them happen and forced them to happen. And I think I've learned my lesson on that. Some days I have. I really wanted people to either believe in it or not. And so we picked a goal that really was what the cost was. We're not making, our time is donated, but to produce with the pictures, to produce 1,000, to get a speaker into the schools that were at a higher level, this is what it costs.
Right. That's cool. And how did you sort of put together, like a reward structure system for this book, like without, becoming like a merch store or something, like, oh, we'll just do a bunch of t-shirts or what, how did you start putting together the rewards and the ideas behind, what people would be interested in purchasing to support this?
Well, ours was mission driven. And so we knew that. We hoped that some people would just want to buy it for their kids, but we really were counting on people that wanted to do this because they believed in the mission of it, and getting it into schools and into the hands of kids, and increasing literacy and therefore decreasing the achievement gap. That was our overall message. And so we did one level, and I regret it now. It's my big regret of the campaign. And it's not that big because not that many people signed up for it, but where you actually got a thing. So we just tied it to the book. You get the book, you get an audio book, you get a coloring book, you get, a lesson plan to go with the book. Mm-hmm. But we didn't want to do a whole lot of, like you say, t-shirts and merch and stickers. It's just, that's a waste of money, and it didn't flow with our mission. We did one level where it was like pajamas with the characters and the book for bedtime. And I'm like, oh, now why did I do that? Because most people in our campaign didn't even choose a reward. Not most, maybe half. They just backed it. Yeah.
That's great. That tells you that you have a powerful mission there, because usually every campaign I run, it is always tied into.
They want the stuff.
The stuff and the cheapest price. So that's the two factors. Right.
And that's why it's a little, but it was a whole, like when I was listening to a bunch of podcasts and on how to do these things, and there is a place for projects, for mission projects. And I think you have to look at it a little bit differently than you do for technology or. Yep.
Yeah. Any of the widgets. And I think you're seeing there's a lot of energy on Kickstarter's platform right now for comic books, documentaries. And I think it's because, well, this is my take on it from doing this every single day, but I think Kickstarter is starting to realize that they're becoming the as seen on TV.
Right.
Or like the sharper image at the mall where it's just like, oh, here's this new tech widget from Hong Kong that you can sleep with. I don't know, whatever it is, you wear this mask and really that wasn't Kickstarter's model from the beginning. Like I got started in music projects, so everything was around smaller goal amounts, but you were still getting these really good ideas off the ground, hence kickstarting them to something bigger at some point. So for an idea like this, how do you sort of yourself, and you had how many people were working on it? Was it just you and the other person you said? Or
my co-author was working full time. So one of the important things that we did was we pulled in a team of people that were just passionate about that. So I had a friend of mine who's a graphic designer, and she just loved the idea, and so she did some of the graphics. I had a friend who was going to go around and present in the schools, an African American woman, because I'm not going to go tell that story.
Right.
I wouldn't presume to do that. And she was, part of her contract was to go out and take some of the money and present this in schools. And so naturally she was fired up to promote this thing and make it go. And she did. And then we, by default, the Minority Business Alliance in town heard about it, and they got very excited about it, and they jumped on and they promoted it. And so we kind of formed a team around it. And I really, the more people you can have promoting something, it just helps. You're reaching all of their pockets of people and not just yours.
Yeah. So is that something, because we find a lot of project creators get hung up on this and thinking that they should do it all themselves. So, was it something that you guys just felt like, no, we knew we had to have a team around this? And then what were some of the things you were looking for when you're bringing in these team members? Like, is it just believing in the cause, number one, or is it still like, well, you still got to be kind of good at X, Y, and Z because we want to present this in the right way? Like, how did you sort of walk that tightrope?
We initially, I knew I needed some graphic help. And so I looked for somebody who was passionate about it that would do that. I knew I needed an educator's help. And then, so I looked for someone that would do that. But then as people became passionate about it, I didn't much worry about that. But what was interesting is sometimes we would get a big backer for someone who just loved that person. So the woman who was going to educate in the schools, once they found out, they backed because it was her, not because it was me or my project.
Right.
So I think you need to be pretty open. If somebody wants to help you, take their help, plug them in some way, form, or fashion.
Yeah. Well, it always, I'm one of those people. I listen, if you want to help, jump on in.
No, I'm really not worried about your criteria.
Yeah. I'd much rather not do everything. So that's great. So what does sort of, as you're running this campaign and as you're kind of getting going, what starts to become some of the things that you're worrying about, or what's keeping you up at night as the campaign's getting closer? What's on your guys' mind is like, all right, we know that we need these things to be successful.
Right. We did a really good job of doing the whole pre-launch thing that we'd heard about. We had our people lined up from our family and our close people to donate on or back, I guess you say, on day one. And, we followed the formulas that you guys put out there and that you do the education about, and it does work. I think for ours, we didn't have any advertising money and we didn't want to put any in there. And so we had to get really creative. And the thing that we did was this matching sponsor. So every day of the campaign, I found a local business person and I would announce them on Facebook in the morning and say, Barbara Coates Financial is matching for $250 today. And then I would go later in the day and Facebook Live with her. And I would say, tell us about your business and tell us why you're interested in this project. And so at 8:00 that night, if we'd raised $250, she would dump that in. And so we reached all of her people that way. And we also let our people know that here's a person in town that you might want to support because they're supporting good things. So it was kind of a win-win. That was our big strategy that worked. And we had a matching sponsor almost every day of the campaign. So the things I worried about, I worried about every day, like, are we going to meet the match? Are we going to meet the match? And people followed it. And, at 7:35, somebody would dump in enough that we would meet the match.
That's so great. I mean, that's one of the biggest reasons why I wanted to reach out. Not only does it seem like a good project, but that's one of the most creative strategies I've actually ever heard. So much so that we're implementing it on I've got a documentary project that's an amazing father-daughter story. It just touches a gazillion heartstrings. It needs to be told, but we're not going to spend $50,000 in Facebook ads. So, what are we going to do to be crafty? And I was like, this is an amazing thing because she does have an audience. She does have these things. There's a great mission behind it. Everybody should want to attach themselves to it, if, theoretically. So it's just, it was a really, really solid strategy. And I just think it's really, really creative and one of the best things I've heard actually so far. So very big kudos to you on that side. Yeah, it's awesome. I feel
after listening to hundreds of hours of you guys talking about how to do this, I feel good I contributed.
Yeah, no, you definitely did. I'm the guy who, I try to be on the cutting edge of all this stuff, and that's the first time I've heard that. I was like, that makes so much sense. So let's break that down just a little bit more. How do you start to reach out to people? Because a lot of people get really nervous though about fundraising. I know I've worked with a lot of companies who are sort of borderline nonprofit, and a lot of nonprofits are like, that's cool, but I don't want to be tied into your fundraising. I had a big thing with PBS one time blow up on me. And you start realizing that it's a tiptoe a little bit around that. So how do you start to walk around and just present this in a way that a business or whatever it might be is just like, wow, this is interesting. I'll participate.
The best thing I heard was an interview with Ian Anderson. You're probably familiar with him. He says, just stick with your story. Share your story. And I felt very much more comfortable with that. I don't like sales. I don't like to ask people for money, but I am passionate about this project, and I can share that all day long.
Yeah.
And so I think when you share your passion, why do your father and daughter, why is that story so important? Why does it need to be told? And you just tell that over and over, and you tell it till you're blue in the face.
Yeah.
And you can't believe anybody in your community hasn't heard you talk about it. And then you keep telling it more. Yeah. I'd see people in town and they'd say, oh gosh, there you are. I forgot. I meant to back that thing. Let me go.
Right.
Let me go. They need to be reminded. I need to be reminded. I'll think I want to support something, and my kids will come in, and then I lose track. People don't mind being reminded. Yeah. If you believe in either your product or your story or your mission, you have to believe in that. If you're I don't know how people could just sell something. I couldn't.
Yeah, it can be challenging. There's no doubt of it, because I do crowdfunding all day, and sometimes the harsh truth is we get some projects where it's just like, nobody wants this thing.
Nobody wants it. Yeah.
As much as I get it, you worked on it for 10 years, but man, the world doesn't want this thing. And then you get some where it just goes gangbusters. And it started to kind of humble us a little bit as to, how important it is to literally just have a great story and a great product. If you have that's like 90% of the battle. Then you can have a marketing guy do some cool little techniques and stuff, but you got to have a good story. You really do. And that's really at the core of it. And if it's, I got a brand new fidget spinner, it's like, what? We're done.
Right.
That's cool. So what does
solving a problem? I think we had a student do our video. We had no high tech video. He's just a kid that works at my camps in the summer, and I really like him. But did such a good job capturing, we would ask the kids the question I said at the beginning, what are your favorite books? Who's your favorite character that looks like you?
Yeah.
And then silence. And just capturing that story, that why is this important? And to show it in a quick way, you can't argue with that.
Yeah, no, 100%. So what does like the next year look like? I mean, you've got the funds, the campaign was successful, obviously that's a win, but now what's happening behind the scenes to get the books into schools and just how are you delivering everything?
We have the audiobook done. We paid for out of the campaign. We have the coloring book done. That was the first 10 images. We're waiting on the rest of the images for the book, and it should be out mid-March. And then our educator that's going to go around, some of the backers back at a level where you got a presentation and 30 books for your school and the lesson plan. And so she'll start going in April and May to schools. And our hope is that once this thing goes on Barnes & Noble and Amazon and everywhere else, that will make enough money to fund book 2 and then book 3. And so, or we may have to go back to
right.
the next one.
Well, I mean, is that something though that you envision of like sort of always using Kickstarter to kind of literally kickstart it, whatever it is, even if it's lower dollar amounts, just to get that sort of marketing out there? Or do you see it just going more traditional moving forward?
I think more traditional for this. In reality, we were chosen as a project we love on day 2, and we thought, oh my gosh, we've heard about this. This is the dream. It didn't help us much. I mean, 90% of our backers came from some contact we had or one of our business sponsors had. That could have been done locally.
Right, right.
But it was a good learning process, and it was. I think a lot of people saw that campaign, and maybe they didn't back it, but maybe they are now aware of that issue.
Well, you might have ran into, and we describe this a lot too, there's just a lot of people that just don't back on Kickstarter. They just don't do it. They don't think of it. So, so that you still might have got in their brain, right? They're thinking about you, and they're just sitting in the background and waiting for it to, it's on Amazon now. I buy from there. I know how that works. So that's definitely a huge thing. I mean, we see it all the time, which is why we always typically run post-campaign funding right afterwards, where it just looks like it's e-commerce now, and people are like, oh yeah, I back that thing.
Right.
Like, oh, okay, cool. It's just, basically the same process, same PayPal, same Stripe, same credit card, but whatever. You just didn't want to put it in this thing, so that's a part of it. So what, so that's the next year. What does like the next 5 years look like for you? I mean, where do you see this thing sort of going? What's the big ideas? What's the big dreams?
The big dream is that you have 10 to 12 of these in a series that can sit on a kid's bookshelf or a teacher's bookshelf. And that this is just as normal as Captain Underpants or Diary of a Wimpy Kid. And we'd like to go up the river. I'm in Mississippi. My author is from Mississippi, but she now lives near St. Louis. And so we want to go Mississippi, New Orleans, Mississippi, Memphis, St. Louis, Chicago, Detroit. That is our goal.
That's great. That's awesome. And just to kind of, I mean, how do you guys start to plan and make this stuff happen a little bit in your mind? I mean, are you laying some of that groundwork for what you're talking about, or is it something that you're just like, we'll get to that,
Both. I mean, I have a lot of other irons in the fire as well, but I've written books, and so I know what is the process of getting those out. And for us, we're really addressing schools. We're just going through the schools, and there's not a school librarian that will tell you, oh yeah, I got too many of those kind of books. It's not true. So every school librarian is looking for what we are producing. And we know it's quality. We know it's quality because we got the responses from the traditional publishers. It just wasn't what they were looking for marketing.
Right.
So we have to market that. And it's not very hard to market this because it fills a hole.
Mm-hmm. You're right. Yeah, you're right. So this may be a silly question because I just don't quite know the inner workings, but is this something that at some point could be in every school without having to go teacher by teacher per se, but like it becomes like a require, like, hey, every elementary school has to have these things. Is that a possibility at all in something like this?
You could go through Scholastic, if you got enough traction, but publishing is a funny business. Yeah. And I know this in the music, side of things, but that's the reason there are indie musicians, and there are some great indie musicians, and thank God they didn't give up and say, well, I didn't get a big record label.
Right.
It's apples and oranges. It just depends on what they're looking for. And so we could hopefully we're going to have to show from the bottom up that yes, people do want this, that this is wanted. But at the moment, I don't think they see that people will buy it.
Interesting. How does it work with the book fairs? And this, so like we have a book fair that shows up at my.
Scholastic is the giant.
That's the one. That's where they come from, and that's the one that picks the books. Because I don't know what we buy. We buy them every 3 months. I guess they maybe should.
Yeah, and we'll reach out. We will definitely reach out to them.
Yeah.
But I just, there are other ways to do it.
Sure. Yeah. I was just wondering actually for my own self, because I never really thought about why these are the books in our, and I live in a very diverse, I live outside of Detroit, Farmington area, and we live in a very diverse community. We have one of the biggest Indian populations here. We have a big Muslim community, and my kids are white, they're over here, but I bet you this issue happens in there. We think about this all the time too, where it's like my son, most my son's class is Indian. I know the books that they come home are always little white kids reading. So I'm sure that this isn't just in the African American community. This could be in other things too. So just kind of imagining why certain books show up where they do. It's interesting. So very interesting. Well, this is awesome. So, I mean, I'm very glad we got a chance to talk. So where can people like dive into the world, support, do whatever? How do you guys, where do you want people to go?
They can go to one of two places. I have an author site, which is Alison at AlisonBuehler.com. You can remember Ferris Bueller.
Bueller.
Yeah. So that's easy. Alison at AlisonBuehler.com, or my nonprofit, which is, we did the Helping Hands project as this project this year. Every year in November, we pick something in the community to raise money for. And so we kind of piggybacked on this, and that's the homesteadeducationcenter.org.
That's awesome. Well, Alison, I appreciate taking time out of your day here to talk about this. This is an amazing project. We all learned something today, so that's always a big benefit too. Amazing stuff here, and I wish you nothing but success. And I look forward to other Kickstarters, and I'd love to be the first one to hear about whatever you're working on next, because really cool stuff going on here.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate your time.
No problem. Thanks, Alison.